So I see a lot of people talk about what it would be like to get an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. revival of some sorts on Disney Plus today, either in the vein of bringing back some cast members or having a straight up spiritual successor, kind of like Agents of S.W.O.R.D. or something similar. And I think it will be fun to talk about this for a little bit because it's an idea I've also wondered about and would like to see, but this video isn't really going to be me saying if it's likely or not likely, but more so comparing what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was like in its early seasons and maybe seeing if that would work in today's MCU. And I don't mean taking the actual storylines and characters and putting them in phase 5 or anything, but more like the actual spirit of what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was as a TV show, kind of like the gap it filled in the Marvel Cinematic Universe at the time, and if that's a gap that still needs to be filled today, or has the MCU maybe even moved past the need to have a show like S.H.I.E.L.D. in its roster. Also, if you're new to the channel, I make tons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., DC, Marvel in general, Star Trek videos, make sure to subscribe. But I think the context of where Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. aired is really important for a conversation like this, because airing as a 22 episode show on ABC every year for the first 5 seasons of its run is extremely integral to the kind of show that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was and the kind of show it worked as. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D.'s 6th and 7th seasons are much shorter at 13 episodes each, and to me those seasons more so resemble kind of a streaming show in some ways because of this. Season 6 and Season 7 kind of work as one complete season though, kind of like 2 parts of a whole that were split up because of the smaller episode count. But streaming services work very different to this. A lot of 6 to 10 episode streaming shows feel like long movies than what a show airing on ABC would have been like. And that's not a bad thing, it works really well for what streaming is, it's just the nature of being a streaming show means that there's, I guess, less of a need to have one-off episodes or drag storylines out. The Disney Plus Marvel shows especially do feel like they're just an MCU movie that was spread out over 6 or so episodes. And if we were to get an Agents of S.W.O.R.D. or an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. show, it would likely be a Disney Plus show just because that's where Marvel shows go today. And to be honest, I'm not really sure that's in the spirit of what Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was. 22 episodes didn't just mean we grew with the characters and we fell in love with them, but it's just harder to do that with shorter shows. But I also think the 22 episode yearly format was so integral to how Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. worked alongside the MCU. It allowed for the show to develop their early stories in tandem with how the MCU was expanding. People rightfully point to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. drifting apart from the MCU as when the show gets good, and a showcase of why S.H.I.E.L.D. doesn't and never needed the MCU stories in order to be a good show. And I agree, I think a show from this cast and crew that was not tied to the MCU would still have been some of the best TV of its time. But I also still think the MCU was very important to the development of the stories S.H.I.E.L.D. would tell. For example, Season 2 being all about S.H.I.E.L.D. working in the dark and going after Hydra works because of Winter Soldier did. The LMD and Framework storyline probably doesn't happen if we didn't have Age of Ultron come out a year prior, bringing in AI and stuff like that. The Ghost Rider and more magical elements likely don't happen if we don't have Doctor Strange coming out. The entire space arc likely doesn't happen without the crew from S.H.I.E.L.D. knowing Avengers are going to space in the, at the time, upcoming film Infinity. Like, yes, a lot of these stories are original to the show and don't have many connections to the MCU in terms of tie-ins, but I still think the MCU sort of opens the floodgates for S.H.I.E.L.D. to be able to tell these stories. Now sure, you could do S.H.I.E.L.D. specials that come out alongside movies. A S.H.I.E.L.D. 1 hour special that comes out alongside Captain America Brave New World or Thunderbolts, that'd be awesome. But I think the interconnecting stories or tonally similar stories only happening when a new movie comes out feels a little disingenuous to what S.H.I.E.L.D. as a show was. S.H.I.E.L.D. got to have episodes the same weeks as The Dark World, Winter Soldier, Age of Ultron, etc. And while they had tie-ins, these movies simply informed and slightly changed the direction of what the show was doing that season. But it did so in a natural way that really felt like it complemented the characters and the arcs that were happening on the show at the time. Like having Coulson being so mysterious all season 2 be directly tied to an event from Age of Ultron. Having Grant's entire character hinge on the twist from Winter Soldier. Like, you can't do this kind of long-form storytelling if a S.H.I.E.L.D. style show is relegated to just specials that come out every so often, or even as a Disney Plus show. Like, if we have 5 episodes of a S.H.I.E.L.D. show come out in the week leading up to a new MCU movie, with the 6th and the final episode coming out the week of, that still feels like it doesn't really get why the original S.H.I.E.L.D. stuff worked so well in that department. But I mean, in terms of the current MCU landscape, a show like S.H.I.E.L.D. feels a little unusual in terms of how it could work. Sure, for things like tie-ins to the political parts of Captain America 4 or for Thunderbolts, then yeah, I think S.H.I.E.L.D. is a prime show for that. But there are so many MCU projects that have either come out recently or are coming out that are focused on characters or things that I'm not really sure how S.H.I.E.L.D. would connect to properly. Like Fantastic Four coming out next year seems like it might primarily take place in the 1960s of a different Earth. Loki's 2 seasons were so focused on the entire timeline collapsing, with just Loki trying to protect it, that while sure there are some ways you could loop certain characters from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. in, I have no idea where you'd even begin with that. It feels like the MCU lately is very much in a place where you'd almost have to turn a newer S.H.I.E.L.D. show into something almost like Legends of Tomorrow, where they're far more than just our Earth-based in terms of threats and such. I will say though, I do think early Phase 4 could have been a great time for an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or S.W.O.R.D. style show, mainly because, yeah, they had just introduced S.W.O.R.D. properly, but full episodes with characters we care about dealing with the aftermath of things like WandaVision, or Falcon and the Winter Soldier, or Eternals, or No Way Home would have been really great and gone very far towards making Phase 4 feel a little less empty in my opinion. Because one of the major complaints thrown at Phase 4 of the MCU was the sheer amount of projects we were seeing. Like every month we had something MCU related. But I don't think that's as much of an issue as my main issue, which to me was that this era of the MCU was kind of just empty. It felt empty in terms of the events each show or movie would have. The older MCU stuff kind of felt like every movie or show was leaving an impact, and that this was, yes, partly due to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. tying into events, but just in general, it felt like things weren't really glossed over or left alone for too long before a subsequent project would address that thing. But during Phase 4, the sheer amount of projects coming out meant that the MCU would go years and 10 projects before a major event or a major character would return, or be addressed in some way. And it made the overall MCU feel a little less interesting to me. It made it feel like there was less weight to what was happening in these movies and shows. And I think S.H.I.E.L.D. really dealt with that and that just stuff in general kind of incredibly well during its run. And I guess bringing that over into the current MCU would have worked in a fantastic way. But I also guess I'm wondering now if maybe that time has passed, if there was a place for this kind of show 3 or 4 years ago, but in today's MCU, where we've got so many projects like Loki or Deadpool 3 or Fantastic Four, where we're kind of focused on certain areas that characters might not fit or work in these contexts, if that's maybe where they don't fit anymore, if maybe the time for an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. or S.W.O.R.D. show is kind of gone, that's an interesting conversation to have. I also, though, to be completely honest, don't think I'd want a 6 to 10 episode streaming version of the show. I think seeing our characters again in something like that is fine and awesome, but in terms of a full-scale revival or sequel series that attempts to fill that gap, I genuinely feel like because of how unique and essential to the early MCU that Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was, you kind of need that borderline procedural 22-episode style show. But I'd be curious to hear everyone's thoughts on that. This was a new style of video where I kind of just wanted to talk about a very niche topic, I guess. But if you want to see more kind of videos like this, make sure to let me know. If you enjoyed it, subscribing would be a huge help. Liking and sharing it to someone who might like it would also be awesome. And I hope you enjoyed the video and have an amazing day.